Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so pleased to introduce this virtual event with Grace Lavery presenting her new book, Please Miss, a heartbreaking work of staggering penis in conversation with Tori Bedford. I hope you're all doing well and are safe. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community, including our recent digital community. And every week we host events here on our Zoom account. Upcoming virtual events include Sarah Manguzo in conversation with Julie Oranger, Gal Beckerman in conversation with Sewell Chan, and Kelly Weil in conversation with Talia Lavin. Please check out the event schedule on our website at harvard.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates and to browse our bookshelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, you can click on the Q&A button on your screen and we will get through as many questions as time allows. This event will also have closed captioning available. Depending on the version of Zoom that you are using, you may need to enable captions yourself by clicking on the closed caption button on the screen. And in the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase copies of Please Miss from harvard.com. Your purchases make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore in Cambridge. So we thank you all very much for continuing to show up and tune in, not only in support of our authors, but also of the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And lastly, as you likely have experienced in virtual gatherings such as this one, technical issues may arise. If they do, of course, we hope that they do not, but if they do, we will do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding. And now I am delighted to introduce our speakers. Grace Lavery is an associate professor of English at University of California, Berkeley, a prominent public intellectual and activist. She has contributed to the Los Angeles Review of Books, Autostraddle, The New Inquiry, Them, The Guardian, Foreign Policy, and Slate. She's been sober since January 2016 and full-time as a trans person since March 2018. Tori Bedford covers Boston's neighborhoods, including Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan for the GBH News Dorchester Bureau. Her education reporting has been featured in the Emmy-nominated GBH special project COVID and the Classroom, and previous experience includes television reporting on Greater Boston, music, arts, and culture coverage for GBH Music Front Row Boston, producing Boston Public Radio, the All Revved Up podcast, and contributing as a radio host to Curiosity Live, a weekly radio program from the GBH Curiosity Desk. Tonight, they'll be discussing Grace Lavery's new memoir, Please Miss, a heartbreaking work of staggering penis. This is a kaleidoscopic, genre-defying account of how Grace Lavery solved her penis problem and set out on one misadventure after another. Among her many accomplishments is having me read out the word penis make that 4 times in an author introduction. Carmen Maria Machado praises this is the queer memoir you've been waiting for, a dizzying mix of theory and pastiche, metafiction and memory, hilarious and sexy and terrifying in its brilliance. But don't worry, Lavery is an avalanche you'll be glad to be buried under. I'm delighted to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, Grace and Tori.
Hi.
Hey, are we on?
Are we on? Are we going now?
You're here.
Okay, we're on. Tori, your resume sounds so incredible.
That's all made up. It's just a
wow. Well, congratulations on that, because you sound like Miss Boston. You know, you sound like you've won Boston.
I want to just say thank you to the Harvard Bookstore, on behalf of me, Miss Boston, and just thank you so much for everybody who came to this. And it's a pleasure to have you here. And I hope that we can answer all your questions and have a real conversation at the end of this. Love the Harvard Bookstore, gotta support independent bookstores, and Grace, thanks for hanging out. So I'm really happy to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited we could do this.
Let's talk about this this book though.
Yeah.
I think that Nell just described it as genre defying. And you have mentioned that I think you wrote this on your phone in like the notes app.
Yeah, mostly in the
it's kind of, you know, it's like bits and pieces of everything. You've got like musical,
which you can tell, right? Yeah, it doesn't
no, yeah, this is exactly
I know
my notes app. I just don't have a publisher. I think it really is. It's interesting to me that it does defy genres. There's like sci-fi and it was interesting. I didn't know when it was going to be published that it was going to be a memoir, because I had read the initial like PDF version. I didn't know that it was a memoir when I first read it, because it's so many things. But it makes sense.
That's amazing. What did you think it was?
I don't know. It's like you go inside your brain and it's like you just have this adventure. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't think that the word memoir like does justice to it really. But I am curious about how you feel. Like there's this conversation in the book between you and Danny about, you know, the sort of trope or trend of like trans people writing a memoir about their experiences. And, you know, I think we need more of those. And I do think that your life experiences you can tell are sort of, you kind of sometimes have to pick them out and then sometimes they're presented to you in this. But I'm curious about how this process, like what the process was for this and how this style came about and why you chose to do it this way instead of being like, I once was a little English girl and this is how it all started and here's my penis.
Well, I want you to write that book.
That's
please. That's good. In fact, you know, that reminds me that you owe me some writing because we were supposed to be sharing writing, and I'm still waiting. But it makes me realize that in fact, you know, you could absolutely write a story about being a little English girl with a penis. And that would be.
Question, please?
Okay. What the question was? How did I write this book? Why did I decide to write it?
Why this book and how this book, and also what book? You know.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. I'll do my best, Tori, but you know, it's a very So, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this question of like, why didn't you just write a normal book, Grace? Why didn't you just like write a normal book that tells it like it is? And I guess I have a few different responses to that. The first one is like, I honestly don't entirely think that I chose the way that I wanted to write that I wrote this book. I think that some of it was just like, I tried to tell my story as honestly as I could, and this is how it came out. But there were sort of political conditions of possibility that, you know, that necessity. And one of those, which I do talk about in the scene you're talking about with Danny, is that there is, I think, a kind of felt injunction placed on trans women often, that our existence needs to be constantly not merely narrated, but also theorized and defended. The implication being, if we sort of lose the ability to justify our being alive and in the world and in the women's bathroom, if we lose that ability or we kind of, we tremble in that, in that performance, then our civil rights will be taken away from us at the least, and at the worst, you know, far worse things will happen. And one of the things that's most important to me in this book and in life in general is to say, like, I don't actually really understand any of this any better than anyone else. I can work through it. I can understand its history. I can understand what other people have said about these kinds of things. But, you know, I don't have an especially coherent or totalized or scalable theory of what transness is, or what my transness is, or why I transitioned, or why I got to a stage in my life when I couldn't do anything but transition. And I think that that's, you know, something that if I'm going to tell the story of me in as straightforward a way as I can, it is a story, at least in part, about a lack of clarity and a lack of certainty. And, you know, there's this other thing that happens, which is that we are often told that we have to, you know, the transition should be about learning how to be authentically, or how to sort of perform the truth of who one is. And, you know, some of that has been true to my experience, and some of that has felt right. But then there's this other thing, which is like everything that is most valuable and necessary to me about transition actually has to do with the ways in which it's enabled new forms of creativity on the one hand, or new forms of kind of ethical commitment on the other hand, or new forms of intellectual engagement, or new ways of understanding the world. It hasn't always felt like, you know, finally I know who I am and I don't have to sort of continue to quest. Like, the book is very much about continuing to quest even after these two events, which are recovery from drug and alcohol addiction and a sex change, you know, which are often taken as the end of a story. So that's the last thing I'll say in response to this question, why didn't you just write a normal book? Which is that there's a normal way to tell the story of transition and recovery. And the problem with it is that, you know, and the story goes like this, you know, I used to have this terrible life where I used to drink constantly, and I would wake up hungover and I'd be sweaty, and then I would start drinking again, and I'd go out on the town and I'd be shaking, and I would like drink until I passed out, and then I'd do the same the next day. And then I would go to, you know, do something incredibly dramatic, and I like threatened someone with a knife, and I got all my clothes stolen from me by a malevolent, you know, day trader from whatever. And I have those stories, and some of them are kind of fun, like, you know, drinking at a hotel in Oakland and cracking my tooth open. This is like in the early afternoon, cracking my tooth open on a piece of popcorn. That split my tooth open until I was covered in blood, but I was too drunk to do anything. So I had to, and I was out of friends because I was just an alcoholic at this point. So I called a colleague who was really new, like he was the only person who would answer my call because he was new. And I was like, hey, I'm at this hotel in downtown Oakland. I need you to come pick me up and take me to an emergency dentist. By the way, I'm wasted and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he naturally, but in this case incorrectly, assumed that I was working a moonlight gig as a sex worker in, you know, in downtown Oakland, which I wasn't. But, you know, that's a sort of like, oh, that's a fun anecdote, you know.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I'm just going to interrupt you to say that I can't tell what's more British about that, the story itself, or the fact that you think that that's a funny story.
Well, you know, I mean, it's like, it's titillating and
fucked up story.
No, it is. No, I know that it is, but it's also like, you know, I mean, I've got so many of these, and like, what do you do with them except for laugh, you know? And that's not one of the worst ones. That's just like, that's just a small injury. Yeah. Although the tooth is gone, you know, I don't have that tooth anymore. Anyway, my point is that there are stories about that. And so then you tell these stories like, oh my God, my tooth, blood, you know, maybe I was a sex worker, blah, blah, blah. And it gets very exciting. And then all of a sudden you say, and then it just got so bad. And guess what? I stopped drinking and now I'm really happy because I don't have to live like that anymore. And the problem with this is that there's no way to read this where sobriety is as interesting as active addiction. It is just sort of straightforwardly the case that whether one finds the story of the cracked tooth and the emergency dentist funny or disturbing, it's like, it's not as good as, and then I started going to AA meetings and, you know, eating stale donuts, and you know what, it was great. Like, and I can, people try to put a brave face on that, but I think we all know that the story is not, the narrative form doesn't live up to the experience of recovery, which is completely, utterly disorienting. And the thing that is, you know, true and difficult to write out is that, in fact, when one gets sober and moves from a time when one has been organizing one's life around consumption of drugs and alcohol into a phase of existence where one is organizing one's life around, you know, trying to stay sane without drugs and alcohol, that the immediate effect, I think, for an alcoholic, and, you know, maybe I should just say for me, the immediate effect for me was that my life became totally bizarre immediately. And, you know, that's what the story needs to be. The story is not about how it used to be crazy and now it's normal. The normal thing is like, whatever else is happening in my life, I can rely on alcohol and drugs to get me to bed, you know, and to get me to like survive in some way, until the day, you know, which probably wasn't too far away, when they decided I wasn't going to survive anymore. But, you know, it was after that moment of privation that the crazy thing happened. And that crazy thing was like, how am I going to live without that? And how am I going to confront that? I remember this, you know, it's just like an anecdote off the top of my head. It's like, again, not in the book, but I mean, it could have been in the book.
I think,
like, what?
I was going to say, I appreciate that it's not linear, because I think that you're right. I think there are a lot of stories that we want, there's a narrative about a lot of experiences in that we portray them as linear. And I think the experiences of sobriety and transition are they're not linear. They are a constant work in progress, and they're a constant evolution. And I think that that's what I like about this format, is that there's absurdity and there's humor and there's these really heartbreaking stories, but it's like, it is how it doesn't happen in this cohesive, straight, you know, this line that builds and creates this experience that like, you worked at it and you got it and now you're here.
And now this is how I made it to the great, you know, the Pisgah site of Palestine. No, it really is not that. It's something quite different to that. It's I mean, so the story I was about to just like relate that just sort of came to my head was, you know, for the first year or two of recovery, I used to go to Denny's quite a lot. And, you know, Tori, you know me, I think, relatively well. I mean, if this isn't obvious to the other people in the room, Tori and I are friends, and, you know, I'm really grateful that my friend is doing this with me. But so Tori, you know me pretty well. I think you can imagine like both what was exciting to me about going to Denny's and also what was kind of like repulsive about it, which is like, I'm incredibly snobby about food. But also I'm incredibly sort of like reverse snobby about everything else. And so I have this like, you know, I sort of loved Denny's and hated Denny's, but I used to go to Denny's all the time. And I was remembering just now one moment where I stayed outside chain smoking outside Denny's with a sober heroin addict that I was friends with, who turned out again to be just like a totally unhinged and dangerous person, but kind of amazing, you know. But this is like someone who had like broken a bottle in someone's face. Anyway, I was hanging out with her and a friend of mine who was actually not an alcoholic, weirdly. And we just like were chain smoking and laughing and telling each other jokes until about 5 a.m. And we were just in hysterics standing outside Denny's. And this group of bikers came up to us and asked us where to score meth, which was understandable, because why on earth would otherwise these three very weird and strung out looking people be chain smoking outside Denny's at 5 o'clock in the morning? And we were just like, you know, it's not that. We are high on something completely different that is very difficult to describe. So that's like what I want the book to feel like, is like giggling for reasons that seem like they're kind of drug related at 5 o'clock in the morning when you're actually not on drugs. And, you know, like, it's a very kind of dumb thing to say, but like literature's a kind of drug too. You know, it is like, there is actually something, one of the things that I'm interested in this book, I guess, is that you can use language to really fuck with your head. And I hope that there are moments in this book, it's my ambition that there are moments in this book that are going to sort of bypass or circumvent your like rational decision-making centers and just like lead straight to pleasure or straight to like pathos or something, or kind of like embarrassment or whatever it is. There are various moments where, you know, I'm trying to produce effects without exactly cluing you into how, and that's kind of like what drugs are in some way, or that's one of the ways in which language can do some of the work that one often looks to drugs to do.
I think that the book, it's nice to be surprised by the humor of a book, that to the point that it like makes you laugh out loud when you're by yourself. And I feel like you've accomplished that with this book, at least for me.
Yay, that makes me feel so happy.
There's a moment in the beginning, I remember I was like reading it, and there's a moment in the beginning where someone's in the room talking to you and Danny, and then all of a sudden she said something and you had forgotten that we all forgot that she was there. But I don't know, like just whatever it was that she said was just like, oh great, she's there too. Like we're just going into this world. Yeah. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of absurdity in this, but I also think there's a lot of reality and things that are kind of these like painful, heartbreaking moments that this is how you deal with these things, right? Like you face so much criticism in the world just for being yourself. And I think it's interesting earlier that you were talking about how, people have to like trans women are forced to and expected to defend themselves and explain themselves and justify their mere existence. But, you get letters in the book from clowns who, because it's, and we'll get into that, but who tell you that they are just, it just reflects this reality that you live, where people constantly reach out to you to tell you that you should not be here and that you should not have a voice and that you should not exist. And in writing this book, I'm curious about both, sort of your desire to be understood, and if that's something that you have abandoned, like this isn't for those people really. But I think it's also reflective of your online presence, which is, you get into it with people. Like people tell you things, you get into it. And sometimes it's like, are you trying to get them to understand you? Or are you trying to seek solidarity from the people who already do understand you to demonstrate the absurdity of like what you have to deal with, which is horrific? But there's always a humor to
I don't know. And I know that, you have sometimes been very good at texting me, Grace, is this still fun? Is this okay? And
sometimes it's really
sometimes it is really intense. And there's a lot of people in my life, including everyone who's really close to me has at some point said, this is ridiculous, why are you doing this? And I don't have a good answer to it, except to say I'm an alcoholic and I'm an obsessive, and that's part of it too. And that doesn't mean that it's always a sort of violation of my sobriety, but it is definitely part of why I feel like I can convince everyone, of whatever it is. I don't really know what it is that I'm trying to convince people of.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't feel like you're trying to convince them as much as you are kind of playing with them. And it's so interesting. Like, I think that the use of the clown throughout the book clown is so many different things. The clown is danger, and the clown is something that people are scared of in an unwarranted way, and the clown is someone criticizing you, and the clown is you, and the why? I don't know, my question is not why clowns. That would be like, what if every question was like, why book, Grace? Why clowns?
Why did she write this book? Tell me. Yeah, no, but it's good. No, the fact is
Grace, you really should have kept this in your No, I guess I'm just saying the metaphor of the clowns is interesting, like how many different purposes they serve, and I think it's the exploration and analysis too that you apply to why we are afraid of clowns is really it's interesting, because I don't know that I've ever really seen it that theme explored in an academic kind of way, like the fear of clowns. And that may be just due to my own lack of research on clowns, but
I don't think that people have done as much with clowns as I want to do here, and maybe I don't do it successfully. People will decide, but I don't think that it's an image that people have really grappled with. So yes, it is true that in this book, the clown becomes this, completely absorptive, absorbent and absorptive. Is that, I mean, maybe they mean the same thing, absorbent anyway, master metaphor that just sort of sucks up so many different things. Like it sucks up it sucks up me, it sucks up people who hate me, it sucks up people who are like me, it sucks up it's like gender dysphoria, it's also whiteness, it's also Britishness, it's also a relationship to the past, a relationship to pleasure, working class entertainments that are a bit embarrassing and that we sort of imagine that we've moved on from, mass entertainment in the form of clearly the clown is also kind of the marshmallow man, and you know, that's the whole thing in the book. And yeah, so the clown is everything really. And I mean, you know, I have my mother, when my mother read this book, whoops, no. When my mother read this book,
talk about a Freudian slip.
I know. Well, when my mother read this book, the first thing she said was like, "I really loved it. You know, it reminded me of a book that I read the other day that someone said it's trying to change what it means to be a novel, and I thought your book was trying to challenge what it means to be a book." And I thought that was a lovely and odd thing to say. Yeah, no, it was. But then, so I was really moved because obviously, like, my mother doesn't come out of this book like unscathed. You know, there's like the trauma. You know, there's like
there's something
stuff.
worse for sure. Yeah.
No, it's true, and I wanted to be fair to her, and I don't like, you know, want to be moaning about how my mom never understood me. I mean, like, she tried as well as anyone else could, but it's, you know, it's like I talk in some detail about weird sex life, and I talk about like moments where she has been both a victim and an agent of like interpersonal violence, and you know, all of that stuff's real. But so so that was her first response. But then a few days later, she texted me like, "Grace, I just wanted to know why clowns." And I was like, you know what? I mean, like, I don't have an answer to that question, but what I can say is like, it is the question. Insofar as this book has a question that it wants to ask, that's it. And I don't have a coherent theory of clowns, except to say that, you know, I think the clown is oddly the centerpiece of our entire way of thinking about the world today. And that the clown is somehow, you know, the vision of ourselves that we're most afraid of, and the version of our past that we're most desirous to be reunited with. And, you know, all of these things seem true, and they're true not just for me, but I think they're true for everyone. And I think they're structurally true of the way that the world reproduces itself day in, day out. You know, they're why Louis C.K. still has a career despite being, you know, this kind of like sort of sexually abusive, let's say, guy. You know, he gets to say, "I'm a clown." That's the important thing here, is like male objection played for a kind of laughter. You know, fine, that's how Twitter works. It's like people are constantly trying to turn things into jokes, and then, you know, at the same time, the figure of the clown is this sense of like, well, that's doing it badly, that's embarrassing, that's, you know, that's wrong.
I think it's also just a metaphor for this is a real thing, I think, in real life, where if you know a clown, like if you know someone who's been to clown college, or you know, like a person who does clownery, you're like, okay, yeah, clowns, like whatever, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, yeah. And if you know like a bunch of clowns, maybe you're part of a clown community, then you're like, I accept clowns, I understand.
Yeah, clowns are part of my life.
But if you've never met a clown and you've only seen, you know, the media portrayal of clowns, like, you may not be a fan. I want to get to
it's true.
Yeah, the
much like trans women, you know.
Right, that's pretty obvious. Well, it's not obvious.
Sorry,
I love the book. The book's great. I'm glad it's a book. Okay, I'm sorry your mom said that. Messed up.
No. Wait, it's fine. I took it as a compliment.
When I said it was an academic,
I thought
you
thought it was an academic book. Oh, I see.
No, oh my God. When I said that it was an academic analysis of clowns,
yeah,
I didn't mean to imply that it was an academic book at all, because this book is quite crass. It's quite
thank you. Yeah.
Quite a lowbrow book. And I think you did something that is kind of taboo, which is you just talk about genitalia a lot. And I do think that you know, in a lot of the trans experience, it's like so many people feel that they have just been reduced to their genitalia. They're asked about their genitalia. They're judged based on their genitalia. And it all comes down to that. And that's all that matters. And you just bring it up. I
mean, it's the same thing. I would not have written a book with the word penis in the title were it not for the fact that in any number of different settings, my personhood is reduced to my genitals. And I wish that that weren't the case, but it's impossible not to have a bizarre relationship to your genitals under the conditions that trans women are in today, where, when I walk into a changing room, I'm a person with a penis in a changing room. And that's just very odd. Like, I don't think think that's how most people in my life think about me. Obviously, it's not how I want my colleagues to think about me, or it's not how I want my friends, my lovers, my husband to think about me. But it is out there in the world how people think about me. So, that's just, insofar as there is a public and a possibility for a public address of any kind, that public address involves genitals. And so that's, I just didn't want to, there's something about this which is just like, okay, you want to talk about trans women's genitals? Let's talk about trans women's genitals. Let's do it a lot. Let's do it unapologetically. Let's do it relentlessly. Let's make sure that we understand every element of it. Let's talk about it without blushing and without doing that thing that people do of reducing everything to sort of, the technical vocabulary of science, which is fine and useful, but it's its own kind of euphemism, I think. And if one really is trying to avoid euphemism, one has to be even more direct than that.
Yeah, and once again, you're having that conversation when it could be argued that it doesn't deserve a response, but you're like, okay, let's go there, which is really interesting. I don't think that we've seen, I don't know, it feels very unique to me in that way.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a complicated and kind thing to say. I think that a lot of people find it easier to ignore transphobia than I do. And I wish that I did find it easier. And I wish in a way that I'd been able to write a memoir in a world where transphobia and trans misogyny in particular was not a kind of governing structure of my existence. I think I would have written a better book if I had not felt sort of constrained in that way. But on the other hand, one of the unusual things about my life, and one of the things I'm really grateful for, is that I got to transition before I retired. And I think that that's something that, so if I were 30 years older, I would be more of Pfefferman from Transparent. I would be in the closet my entire career, and then when I would retire from my job, I would transition. And what that would have done, there were lots of people that I know, and probably that for whom that's true. That was the life that older transitioning trans women went through. That wasn't my life, and I'm grateful that it wasn't my life, because I think that a life in the closet is very hard. But I also didn't get to transition when I was young, when I could have actually been a young, hot trans woman in my early 20s, rather than sort of off-putting looking older trans woman in her mid to late 30s. But the particular kind of position I'm in, of just someone who's really trying to write a transition out from the middle, not from the position of having retired, and also not from the position of being young, or not from the position of being very young, is an interesting and unusual one. It's a position of Tori Peters as well. Tori transitioned in her mid-30s, and it's not unheard of, but it is something that is distinctive and requires a particular kind of story, and not actually a story that we're very used to telling, because most of our stories about transition are still either people who are transitioning when they're old or when they're young.
Yeah, I want to get to the questions, and I want to have you read a little bit, but I'm curious if before you read something, you can, from your voice, sing to me the Juggalo chicken drink song.
I can do that for you, yeah.
I just need to know what it sounds like, because I feel like in my head it might sound different than.
Well, I'll sing it, but then I want you to sing it. How about that?
Okay.
I do the Juggalo chicken juice rap all day, son. Grab a cup of chicken and I'm on my way, mom. Juice a tasty chicken, I call that foul play, yo. bottle up the chicken like a tasty Fago.
See, that's interesting because that's different melodically than I had interpreted it.
How did you have it?
But it's hard to think of how I had it in my head because I was reading it.
Yeah.
And I was more like, I do the Juggalo chicken juice wrap all day, son. Because it's
yeah,
like,
no, that's great. Yes, son. No, that's good. Yeah.
I'm on my way, mom. You know, like the
No,
last
that's
part.
great. That's great. Yeah.
All right, do you want to read from the book?
I do. You know, I was going to read that. No, I mean, that was beautiful. I was going to read the doctor scene, but I've changed my mind. I'm changing my mind because we were talking about drugs earlier, and I've already read that part out. So I'm going to read a section of the book, which is.
If the reading that I asked you to do was just the Juggalo chicken drink wrap.
Yeah, maybe that's it. So thank you for coming. No, but I'm going to read the section of the book that's like a pastiche of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you know, it's something that it was a part of the book that I was told to write by my editor, which I'm very proud of. But anyway, A Wilson's Tale, it's called, because AA was founded by Bill Wilson. Anyway, my brother. Perhaps too much time has passed since the great pole-sitting fad of the mid-1920s. I'd better remind you, in the cold Philadelphia January of 1924, a handsome former steeplejack named Alvin Shipwreck Kelly sat on a small chair at the top of a pole for nearly 14 hours. All of us, the Philadelphia squadron of young lads who saw him, were changed forever by the incident. Soon we were sitting atop flagpoles of our own, erected in our own backyards. Those in the position of watcher would stand below, admiring the regal elegance of the sitter and awaiting our turn. When it was our turn to sit, we watched benevolently over our audience, drinking in every drop of time. We sat for longer and longer, a whole week, a whole day, a week, our mothers or wives sending up provisions. Of course, sitting was preferable to watching. Soon we couldn't bear to spend so much time on the ground. Our groups splintered into smaller and smaller units to maximize our time on the poles. Months would pass, and our circles dwindled until there were just two of us, one watcher and one sitter. My pole partner was named Jiminy DeJounce. He died in the crisis. It was up a pole that I tasted my first droplet of the good life, in the form of a thimble of malt liquor, which had been shot up the pole by my mother or wife, I forget which. Here was glory, concentrated and distilled, that sang on the tongue and coated the throat with love. I had left school a year earlier, having determined that it behooved me to acquire a trade, and thereupon to encounter a wealthy gentleman, and to follow him to my fortune. The pole-sitting fad had taken over more and more of my time. I found that my plan to shine shoes worked especially well, first because the hours were relatively flexible, and second because it could in fact be accomplished while pole-sitting, provided that a second pole was constructed nearby, only a couple of feet higher, such that my customers' shoes were level with my lap or abdomen. Each customer having been served, I would call upon my wife or mother to send up a small bowl of brown mash and a tuppence of malt, and I would suck them both up and count myself a king. From time to time, men would come and stand under me, drawn to the pole-sitting shoe leather lad, as I was known, or Piacesello for short, adapted from the initials. My mother, I think, constructed a sign for me in a mock Italian hand. Il Piacesello. Come sia the amazing, a pole sitting a boy, with a picture of a traditional Italian plumber sucking his mustache. And amazing did not feel too strong a word. Here I was, living life, and didn't I have everything I needed? A steady stream of admirers who would toss their heads in admiration and a view of my neighbor's gardens. Sometimes, for my sins, I peeked to look through my neighbor's windows and caught a glimpse of my wife's negligee or a husband hanging dong. When my wife had gone to bed, my mother having already done so, I dreamed of everything I would do to them if I ever came down the pole. As I grew into manhood, I found myself growing naturally competitive and desirous of the usual appointments for a man's station. The problem was, having placed myself at the top of my pole one week and only 1 week later than a gentleman in Nebraska named Nobby Malachi, I was unable to descend without losing forever my claim on the national, which was to say world, record. So such a station as was to be appointed to me would need to conform to my pole-sitting lifestyle. For was I not on top of the world? My wife died, and another was supplied to me under the Provisions Act. Although since we had no shoes to shine, she remained on the ground while the deed were done. Padre on the second pole, Oxford's plum akimbo. While there was mash and malts to winch, what did I care? These were high times indeed. And I'll leave it there. There's more in that story, but that's just the first part of the story of the pole-sitting lad.
Based off the pole-sitting story, someone said, someone with the username Juggalo Chicken Drink XOXO 420.
Oh my God!
Said, I'm glad
yes.
that this book is non-linear and doesn't play into the weird memoir as redemption narrative. As a writer, but also as a lit professor, why is that version of memoir so persistent?
That's a good question. Well, I think I have a theory as to why it's persistent in the two cases that I'm engaged in, which are transition narrative and recovery narrative. And in recovery narrative, it's because the work of recovery has so much to do with constructing a single narrative out of a kind of time of chaos and fragmentation. So the work is often, highly normative, and it's really hard to think of stories about getting sober or getting clean that really, reflect the reality that life gets harder and weirder when you get sober. Like, that's the thing, is that it is not easier, it's harder. And in the case of transition, it's because we're an embattled cohort of people. We are people who are under threat of having our basic civil liberties removed, and they're being removed all around us. We live in a country which is passing laws that are designed to prevent people from having the kinds of experiences that I've had, and to prevent people like me from living the way that I do. So there's this kind of great and justified fear about letting the world into the full complexity of the experience, because people can't handle the simple version. So that's why there's a kind of political risk to this work, I think, and why one of the things that I think is a question for me is like, is this a book that I needed to publish? Is this a book that it reminds me of a really wonderful album by Kevin Rowland called My Beauty, and it's a great trans feminine album, I think, released rather in 1999. And one of the reviews was like, this is no one should question Kevin Rowland's right to make this record, but it probably shouldn't have been released. I think about that in terms of my own work. Like, am I giving too many of the kind of family secrets away? And, ultimately, I think I have to remain true to a different agenda as a writer. Tori Peters texted me the other day, like, we don't need more politician artists. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be an artist, not a politician then. But it's something that I think about, and it's something I know she thinks about too. Outside of this, I think it's because life writing becomes, especially in the American context, because life writing and autobiography becomes, in the American context, this kind of dream of what success, whatever that is, might be or might supply. So like, if you think about Dale Carnegie, or this like great 19th century, early 20th century memoirs, like, I got rich and you can too. The Art of the Deal is another example of like kind of aspirational memoir that, of course, is just like completely fictionalized, because it's in fact not designed to communicate the experience of being alive in the world. It's designed in order to sustain the fantasy that success is always deserved, the hard work is generally rewarded, and we know that these things are not true. So I thankfully cannot write a book about how I got rich and famous and successful, because I am neither rich nor famous nor successful. I'm just a writer, and what that means, I think, is like there's an opportunity to do something else. And So that's what I want to do, I guess. But then at the same time, one of the other things I can say is like the sequel to this book is a novel. It's like it's a fiction. I mean, the central character has my name. Have you read this? Have I sent you that manuscript yet, Tori?
No.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
And also because I can't read, the question that I was going to put in reference to the poll story is the next question, not the last.
Okay, good. Yeah.
That didn't make any sense, but I can't read. So
yeah, that wasn't really connected to polls.
No, I'm sorry. It's been hard as an
fine,
adult
yeah.
who was illiterate. This person asks, Juggalo Chicken Juice Lover 69. That's not that different from the other one. You said that you wrote this on your phone. Did you always know it was going to be a book? Did it start as journaling, venting? And I think starting, like, it sounds like a lot of the different stories came from different places, but the poll story also, I wonder if like that idea pops into your head and you start just writing it down on things, or yeah.
So I wrote that after I met with my agent, my editor, and Claire Potter at Seal Books, who's someone I'm, really, really indebted to, and who really understood this book and took a chance on this book, and was the first person to say of this book, like, you need to make this book bigger and make it do more, whereas everyone else had been telling me like I had to make it smaller or make it do less because it would be difficult to sell, which it turned out it wasn't especially difficult to sell. I mean, I don't take that as general, a general claim about the market. I have no idea how to sell a book, but one thing I do know is like the advice that I was getting about how to make something easier to sell turned out not to be necessary or true. Anyway, we were talking about stuff that the book could also pastiche. And one of the things she said was like, there's such a genre of recovery literature that you're very clearly reacting against in this book, but which you don't explicitly engage or kind of like play with in the way that you play with so many other genres. Why don't you do that? So I literally, like, she lives in Upper Manhattan, I live in Brooklyn. I was walking around it was COVID times, so it was cold. I was wearing a big coat and I was wearing a mask. And I came back on the train and I spent the entire time in the train just thinking like, okay, how am I going to do this? And then I was thinking what I need to do is find something that someone would be addicted to that isn't alcohol or drugs, that has the kind of vibe of like 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, like Gilded Age and the age of the robber baron and the age of the financial crisis and the depression. Because that's the story of AA, is that it's got so much to do with like, he was a speculator, and Bill Wilson was a speculator, and the high times have to do with like the roaring 20s and the kind of, the financial markets are out of control in a good way. And then the financial markets are out of control in a bad way. And all of a sudden, like the hangover comes and with the hangover comes like, so there's a connection already between like macroeconomic history and the history of AA, which is a very interesting one to me, but I wanted to tell that story in a different way. So I spent the time on the train just thinking like, okay, what would it be? Like, what are the kind of like weird fads of the 20s and 30s? And one of them just turned out to be pole sitting, like it was a real thing. So then I just like got super excited by it. And then in my brain, it was like a version of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that became jammed with pole sitting. And then suddenly I started also thinking about a text called The Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka, which is also a text about addiction in a weird way, but it's about addiction to privation, about addiction to forbearance. So, I was thinking like someone who's at the top of the pole is like that. Anyway, the point is like, it took me about an hour and a half to get back to my apartment in Brooklyn. And by the time I'd arrived back, I like had the thing more or less worked out. And I sent it to her. I'd write it on my phone and I sent it to her the following morning. And that's not super unusual. Like, the review that I wrote recently for that movie I loved. I published a review of it at Bitch magazine. I wrote that on my phone on the train back home from the movie theater in Lower Manhattan. That was like less than half an hour. So this is like not uncommon. I think of writing as this very occasional experience. Like it's very much related to a particular time and place. And the book that I'm trying to write now, which is this academic book, it's like I'm conspicuously writing it in gobbets and then sending the gobbets out to someone else who's putting them in a Word document for me. So I don't have to think about that. Anyway, yeah. But so the question of like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so the question of like whether this was going to be a book, I don't really know. But the thing that I do know, and this is something Paul DeMann says about memoir, is like once memoir is on the horizon, you start living your life as though it was going to be a memoir. And that happens long before you actually start, quote unquote, writing a memoir. And so, you know, although I couldn't be totally sure that all of the different gobbets and like sections of this book always had the future or the inevitable like structure that they would go on to have in the final version, I do know, and I'm very sure that I've been living my life like I was going to publish a memoir at some point since I was a kid.
But not.
And so is Tori
publishing
Bedford, by the way.
memoir,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What did you say?
Not for the purpose of publishing a memoir, but just because you are an interesting person.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm an interesting person because I wanted to write a memoir.
I think there is there are types of people who find themselves in, sorry, my dog is screaming. I think there are people who find themselves in situations where they're like, this would be like I should probably leave for my own mental or physical health, but this would be a fascinating story if I was reading it, you know?
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's especially attractive to alcoholics.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's a moment that I think of as really kind of significant one in my year-long descent into madness, where I was like at a work event in a conference hotel, and like some of my senior colleagues were standing around talking about weed and you know, how you got to find the right blend and the difference between indica and sativa, you know, the organic stuff. And they were talking about it like they were talking about like fancy kombuchas. And it's so important. It's very great for my glaucoma and my goodness, my anxiety. I'm so glad it's easily available now. Anyway, it's this very sort of like posh, airy, sort of slightly intellectualized way of talking about drugs that I hated, because like I was like, drugs, please. You know, I was always like, give me the drugs. I just want the drugs. Anyway, so it was like I decided to tell them this cheeky joke because someone was saying, "Oh, I took the wrong one and it actually didn't help me sleep at all. I was up all night." Or something. And I was like, I know exactly what you mean. Last time I was in Los Angeles, I ended up doing a whole gram of crystal meth because I thought it was low-grade amphetamine. And like I told this joke in the sense like, oh, isn't this person such a rake? You know, isn't this person such a sort of a scoundrel and a scallywag and a rascal? But in fact, they looked at me like, you're out of control, you're in danger, this isn't funny. You know, that joke doesn't work. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, that's terrifying. Because if I've lost the ability to make my, you know, out of controlness, very cute, hello darling. I've lost my ability to make my out of controlness funny and cute. I'm in a lot of danger.
Yeah, I think that, I think that your ability to reflect on it though is something that sets you apart, because I think sometimes people are in the middle of it and you can see that when they're writing and they haven't fully digested it yet, but you are in a place now where you've digested it. So it's not boring to be in sobriety because your brain has done all this work. I know that we only have, well, we've got about 15 more minutes. If anyone else wants to put questions in the Q&A, this is my dog. He was screaming, so now he's hanging out in here with me because he wanted to say hi. Grace, I am curious to know if there was anything, a story, a chapter, an important discussion that didn't make it into the final edit. You talked about that anecdote. I'm also curious about how others there are like that you were like, this is so funny and charming. And it was like, that's quite dark. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, so the first the first version of this book, I guess, was like the first time I tried to open a document, I was like, this Word document is my memoir and I'm going to sell it. And people are going to read it. It was incredibly angry. It was incredibly angry. The main vibe was rage. And I don't know if you remember, Tori, the bit in the book where I'm talking about giving up smoking. And that part is like super, super intense. And it's like this letter that I've got from someone who's also me, who's giving up smoking. And like, I remember writing that. I remember where I was when I wrote that. I was in a coffee shop on Valencia Street in San Francisco, again, on my phone. And it was like 2017, it was years ago. And I showed that to Danny, and Danny was like, okay. And he was really kind of uncomfortable about it. And it was understandable because it was like a totally deranged piece of writing. There was another piece that I wrote around the same time that was, you know, being angry at someone who I perceived was like trying to harm my career. And again, it was like this is a paranoid fantasy that was coming from the fact of giving up smoking. Like the person was actually not trying to harm my career. Although ironically, that person later did try to harm my career, and I did get to diss them in public. So like, you know, but whatever. You know, the point being that it started off with this anger, and I think anger is a common enough response that people have to transition, and when they realize, oh my god, I didn't know this was going to be possible, I didn't know that this would feel this way, why did nobody tell me? You know, in all of my life when I've been looking for people to, you know, share their experience with me about this weird fucking thing that I've had since I was a kid about like wanting to be a woman or something, why did no one tell me that if I took estrogen it would affect that in a really, really profound way? You know, so I started writing these little sections that were actually much more argumentative and much more like, again, as I say, kind of ragey. And a lot of it had to do with Descartes. I was really, really writing through my feelings about Descartes at that time, which sounds so pretentious. It is kind of pretentious. I'm a fucking English professor. Like, I'm pretentious. That's fine.
There's no pretense. Fine. What's the pretense?
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's true. It's like I read
the
books.
Pretentious description really of pretentious, but
yeah.
Okay, but
anyway, so no, I was angry about Descartes. I was angry about mind-body dualism, and I was thinking about it constantly. And I was writing these like, you know, tight and angry philosophical engagements with the various positions that Descartes takes in the Méditation. And I remember sharing this with one of my colleagues, Namwali Sapal. And she was like, I don't know why. You look so cute, by the way, Tori. You just look so adorable.
Regard my new accessory. He's being quite distracted. I told you this was going to happen, that he would be annoyed that I was.
It's just very, very beautiful.
It lasted longer than usual.
Well, you know, so anyway, like the answer to the question, what was left out, long and angry mini essays about Descartes' Méditation, and no one wanted to read that. And Namwali Sapal was like, why on earth are you writing this in the form of like a kind of mean theoretical engagement with Descartes when you could actually write it in a way that is a little bit more interesting, a little bit, that's the question, you know, more like, available to like the affective plurality of transition.
Like, who are you writing this for? And I want you to answer that, but I also think that it's relevant to this next question from H.A. Major. I don't know if that's H.A. Major says, Hi Tori, hi Grace. As a 30-something in early transition, I am heartened and I think also healthily disturbed by the book. Thank you. So I've read a model of politics that puts high value on speech as proclamation and direction of development and change in the world. Do you think this is getting more desperate and sweaty in the early 2020s? I feel like that's relevant to the who did you write this for question.
No, it's true. It is true. And I think, you know, one of the reasons why I'm not ready to let the phrase free speech go, even though it's being, you know, absorbed by these, you know, repulsive sort of scam artists who call themselves liberals, but who, you know, make all of their money out of the far right. People like, you know, Glenn Greenwald and Barry Weiss and the sort of, you know, the disenchanted centrists. I'm not really prepared to let them have free speech because I don't think they understand the first fucking thing about it. And I think that trans people are especially in need of some notion that speech is a vehicle for freedom. Like, if speech weren't a vehicle, it's obviously also a vehicle for necessity. We understand, like, you know, we make history, but not under conditions of our own making. I think that we all kind of accept that Marx was right about that. But Marx, like, obviously, you know, whatever that's worth, profoundly believes in the question of like free speech and the capacity of language to enable world making and reconstruction of class consciousness. And as a medium for the free relations between individuals. Like Marx is terrible. I don't know why I'm answering this question in terms of Marx, because I do know it's because you mentioned sweat, and sweat is this sort of important Marxist quantum. But Marx is terrible at describing what communism is going to be like. He has no idea, and he when he tries to picture it, it just becomes a sort of like dry description of the rules of a meeting, and it just becomes pathetic. He's incredible at explaining why capitalism is so bad and awful. But the moments where we glimpse something in Marx that really feels like utopia, and this isn't my observation, by the way, this is like Michael Denning, and it's the whole tradition of reading Marx, but in relation to socialism, basically. When the moments in Marx where you feel something that's really worth holding on to are the moments where people are talking to each other. And one of the reasons why Marx thinks that the factory is the best, for all of its brutality, the factory form of labor is the greatest innovation in the history of humanity. The reason why he thinks that is because it has put bodies in sweaty contact with each other, such that they can share smells and bodily effluence and language. And that's what freedom is. And it's in those moments of sharing that we begin to think about like what it would be like if we could hunt together, is one of his ideas. I mean, it's like, I don't really want to hunt, but like, that's what freedom is. It's like being in a space. So, being in a space and using language and like getting excited by and appalled by and like having complicated feelings about the stuff that's emanating out of our fellow human beings. That's what I think politics is, and it's in a fundamental way. It's like actually just like the interactions of those kinds of bodies in space. And it makes it very difficult for me to be someone who spends a lot of time online, because like I fundamentally don't think of politics as something that can really exist online. I just sort of like, I think the thing that we do online is something that isn't really politics. It's like, and maybe one of the things that I'm trying to do, and one of the reasons why this book is like reaching so hard for something that probably it doesn't end up grasping, is like it's trying to find a way to like break through the internet and find like the bad smelling other, and like pour language out at them as some way of like experiencing togetherness, experiencing political sodality, or a shared political interest. I don't know what you mean when you say you're disturbed by the book, but I hope that that's part of it. Or I hope that feeling of troublesome co-presence is part of what it might be, because for me that's
you just got to meet some juggalos.
Exactly, the juggalos are a big part of this.
My friend,
I've never really heard an Insane Clown Posse song. Never once heard one, and I
really?
don't intend to start.
My friend went through a big like ICP juggalo phase when we were 13 or 14, and so I had a lot of. Oh, and I told you this story, but I was on the train once when I was 14, and I at my my AA battery died in my off-brand MP3 player, and a gathering of juggalos, they were there, and one of them gave me a battery, and then they shared their Faygo with me. So
I mean, that sounds amazing.
Open your mind,
I know. Stay loose.
I wonder if the disturbance came more from openly, as you mentioned earlier, talking about those things that we're not supposed to talk about, right? With this experience. Yeah. And I don't think you were so afraid of offending people in this, which is also, you got almost, I couldn't finish reading it because it was paywall, but you got almost a positive, the beginning is almost positive of some horrible bad review that you got on this book.
The tough, yeah.
But I thought that was interesting because they noticed that this is quite a populist book, and that it does broach these subjects that they love to talk about, where you said, yeah, I'll meet you there. I'll meet you in this sweaty place. You want to get sweaty? Like,
let's get sweaty. Yeah.
Let's get sweaty. Yeah.
I just saw someone answering about the poll story of White Philadelphia. So there are a couple of different answers to this. One is that's actually where Alvin Shipwreck Kelly did his pole sitting. So the pole sitting fad of the 1920s was indeed.
That's historically
accurate. It's true. Yeah, so that's where he did it. But the other thing is I lived in Philadelphia for 5 years. I was at grad school in Philly. And so I wanted to have that in the book. And the next, as I say, the sort of sequel, which is this novel, has a whole chapter set in Philadelphia where Philly is described in more detail. But this is the one little appearance that it makes. Is, you know, so the end of that story. I'll just read you the last paragraph of that part, so you can get a sense of how
I think the ending is really important. I think the ending is very important to that story.
Today, my life is unrecognizable from the mash and malt swilling swine of my youth and middle years. Though I am older now, my body feels sprier than ever. Upon occasion, I stand up and wave to passers-by who may happen to walk down the street. I have finally mixed the mash and malt together into a single swill, which removes the need for a second straw altogether. And I have passed the straw, now made of the finest malleable plastic available to mankind, through my nasal cavity and down into my throat, so that even the tasks of mastication and inhalation have been rendered unnecessary. My buttocks have finally seized up entirely around the worn lump of metal that used to be a chair. No clenching is necessary, and I am fixed in place by a metal rod that passes up through my body and binds me. Quite like my dear Christ am I, even. My body wrenched inside out, hosed by a mother woman in the summer months, and roasted slowly underneath by another woman wife in the cold Philadelphia winters. On a clear day, I can see the bend of the Schuylkill as it winds past Conshohocken. My waist is extruded by the pole itself. I will surely die soon. Others may work for utopia. For me, it is already here.
Great.
Brava. My dad used to live in Philadelphia, and he joked, New York has everything Philadelphia has. But anyway, thank you so much to both of you for this conversation. Sorry, I just kind of swooped in there because I just really wanted to be able to laugh at the end of it.
No, and it was funny, but it's also quite sad, that story. I think this whole book is like, there's many ways to interpret it.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Aw. What's your dog's name?
His name's Shu. This is Shu.
Shu.
I'm sorry, he wasn't invited, but he is being
of course
very chaotic today. So now he's a part of this thing that we're doing.
Well, thank you, Shu. Thank you, Tori.
Oh,
Thank
and
you, Grace.
Grace reads the audiobook, right?
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
That's also a big perk if you enjoyed some of these readings in her beautiful voice.
Absolutely.
Sonorous English voice.
Right.
Absolutely. I have the print copy is on its way to me, but yeah, I guess I should also get the audiobook. So there you go.
Read it and listen at the same time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, open your hymnal to page. Yeah. So marvelous. Thanks so much to both of you for this conversation and keeping my brain awake on a Thursday night. So thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great. Thank you for having us and for organizing this. And
absolutely. Thank you for organizing Shu.
I'm trying, but that's not always successful. Okay.
All right. Have a lovely evening, both of you, and thanks all of you for watching and listening in. And yeah, buy the book, man. I posted I posted the link in the chat, and have a good evening. Happy reading. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
Tori.